All right, ladies and gentlemen, everyone around and in between. This is Debate Sensei, NFALD edition. This is where we talk about issues that are specifically related to the National Forensics Association LD event. And I have our expert resident, Chad Meadows from Western Kentucky University. Thank you, Chad.
Hi, Jared. It's nice to be here and excited to get talking about some NFALD.
Nice. Yes, like what we are talking about this time is affirmatives. Okay, so we've gone through the topic selection process and learned about the topic in general, but we're going to focus entirely on that first 5 minute speech. Yes, yes.
6 minutes.
Six. Oh, 6, 7. But okay, gotcha. So that first 6 minute speech, right? I'm thinking about IPDA right now.
Yeah.
Right. So the first 6 minute speech, and basically trying to go and survey what people might expect to see out of most affirmatives that they might hit at a tournament. I think that might be a really helpful perspective. It's like, how do you it's like just predicting just like what's going to happen, not even necessarily, think about the responses to them, but just what might we expect to see. But let's start with a little bit more of a sort of a big picture view. What do you look for when you are putting together a 1AC? Like what are some sort of features that you think are sort of uniform?
Yeah. So when you're putting together a 1AC, I think that the first question you want to ask yourself is, what kind of debates do I want to have? And you may, especially if you're experienced, have an idea of what the best arguments are for you. Like, are you a really good critique debater? Are you a really good topicality debater? Are you great on the substance? So I think, especially if you're experienced, thinking through what kind of debates do I want to have, and then planning a little bit of your affirmative strategy from that perspective. So I'll give you an example. I've had students who are, they're like, international affairs majors, or, big IR nerds. They're really
Right.
into econ, and that's their jam, right? And so they're like, I'm not amazing at, critique stuff because I'm not super into philosophy. I'm not super interested in definitions and topicality. But like, if I can get the debate on my terms, which are, the sort of like academic arguments related to the topic, then I think that
Right.
I'll. So for that student, they would pick something that would be very straight up, very obviously topical, very predictable, is very likely to, have the negative, have a lot of prepared arguments that are specific to that particular affirmative. So that kind of debate is the outcome, is that, they're having debates that they want. Let's say that you're like, I love tea, then maybe you pick an affirmative that's a little bit more on the margins of the topic. Instead of the other team to like read topicality, right? So I think the first question is like, what kind of debate do you want to have, and then
Right.
plan from there.
It might be a little bit more about also the debate you don't want to have. I mean, anticipating
Yes.
the negative
Mhm.
is likely going to say might affect your strategy, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so, and that can take on a couple dimensions. Like that could be, like, I don't think I'm that great at tea. So I'm
Yeah.
going to be
Okay.
really topical straight from the jump. It's going to be super obvious that I'm topical. That could also be from the perspective of the topic dimension. So is there a really good disadvantage on the topic that every team's going to read some iteration of? You
Right.
might pick an affirmative that has a built-in good way to respond to that disadvantage. But so those are the first initial questions I would start to ask when putting together the affirmative. Now, in terms of the actual like content, like
Right.
what are you looking for? I would say look for the hard stuff first. That's any file. So it's always easy to find impacts. You can find impacts that nuclear war causes extinction. You can find, a million different ways to imagine the end of the world, or, structural inequity, right? Like there's a lot of, it's not that hard to find impacts. What's harder to find is a solution. So
Okay.
What I think you're looking for is literature that very directly and precisely defines an action that the government could take, or that you could advocate for in the round, that you think is defensible, that you think does a good job of accruing some advantages. And I think look for that first, and then build your affirmative around that part, because that's the hard part to find. Everyone, it's easy to write about the problems. It's a lot harder to envision the solutions.
Right. I mean, and that gets into that gets into some of the arguments that you don't want to have, right? You don't want to have the solvency debate, and so you're looking for it. You're really seeking it out in order to like shut that down. I mean, what that does though is kind of forces the negative into the offensive positions, the disadvantages, and the counter plans too. Because when that becomes so solid, when it becomes like just I got nothing, that's win enough rounds. It like you kind of force them to adapt in that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and definitely like we already kind of covered this, but a phrase that I think is really important to keep in mind is you can't prepare for the easy debate, for the convenient debate.
Mhm.
The
Right.
convenient debate for every half is the day gets up, they read the generic topic decide that you've got a million answers to. They make some, kind of like milk toast solvency attacks to your affirmative, make a, mediocre topicality argument and sit down. And then, in the first, in your rebuttal speech, you're just dancing, right? That's the convenient NC that a lot of teams prepare for a lot.
Right.
You got to have that prepped, but you really need to sort of, I think, if you want to be successful, calibrate your strategy more so towards what's the inconvenient NC for me. Is it a non-conventional strategy that includes some critique arguments? Is it some challenging counter plans? Is it a topicality push that I'm not really thinking about, right? So, I think making negatives want to make your life inconvenient.
Right.
You have to prepare for where negatives want to go, not where you hope that they will go.
Right. And sometimes a good affirmative can really do that. I mean, you could like spike out positions, as it were, giving sort of responses before the argument's even made.
Exactly.
Right. All right. So, like y'all have wrestled with this. When was the topic released again?
July.
The July. So, like you've been at it for a couple months now.
Mm-hmm.
But it gets started at a cooperative, right? Can you tell me what the cooperative is like?
Yeah, so there is a debate cooperative that was online, that was hosted by some of the teams that are on the circuit and
Uh-huh.
helping out and everything. And they, I think, hosted just kind of like an online tournament or an online like camp, and I think it was mostly like during the evening hours.
Oh,
Uh,
really?
yeah, to
So
kind of
that's
accommodate.
a lot different than what I know camps to be. Usually, you're locking yourself up for a week or more, and just really just it's almost like a retreat. So it's kind of shifted a bit.
So I think that the idea behind this is to offer something that is accessible to a greater diversity of students. So yeah, like when I think about like camp that I went to in high school, it was like I went away for 2.5 weeks, and then like came back, I guess, a different person, better or worse. With college though, I'm noticing that there's a lot more of the cooperative model.
Oh, okay.
People are working. If you're in college, I mean, a lot of times over the summer, you're getting a job. You're doing an internship. So
Okay.
it's just kind of and also like at these cooperatives, the like costs are like very minimal, like close to nothing. Most of the coaches that are either doing lab work or doing a lecture, they're volunteering their time. They're not getting paid for it, so it's a little bit more low key.
Okay. Okay. But so they generated some apps there, huh?
Yeah, no, they did do quite a few affirmatives, and I think that it gave a pretty good perspective on what we might see in terms of affirmatives during this season.
Now, are these affirmatives, are they available to
Yeah,
like anybody?
yeah. So this year they did a really good job of publicly disseminating this information.
Oh, cool.
So if you go to the wiki, the case list for
Oh,
debate.
is it on paperless debate?
Yeah,
Or
it's the same wiki that policy uses and high school uses.
okay,
So
cool.
if you go to opencaselist.com,
Okay. All
um,
right, good.
and then from there you'll get kind of like a page, and it has a link to all the different wikis. There's an option to go to NFA College LD, and then one of the schools is online summer debate, and in the team notes of that they have a Google Drive where they've linked all the affirmatives.
Who uh who manages open case list? How's this work? Okay. Do I have
So from what I understand, the open case list started as a kind of like free service that was created by, I want to say, Aaron Hardy,
okay.
who works at the NSDA, also owns Verbatim, kind of the person who like owns Paperless Debate. Uh,
Okay.
I'm not totally sure on that history though. Like I don't know. And from there, I think there may be some sponsorships with different organizations like NSDA or NDCA.
It looks
But
like you have to have a tab room account maybe in order to log in. Is that sound
yeah,
right? Or okay, cool.
yeah. On the bottom of their site, it says that it's supported by the NSDA, the NDCA, the American Forensics Association, and then the California National Debate Institute.
Cool. Cool. I'll have to get my tab room account open. But all right. So like what are it, it, anybody who's kind of getting into the event at the very beginning or they don't have a whole lot of back files, I'm assuming I would if I were doing it, I would be going into this cooperative and finding these apps. All right, let's are we able to talk intelligently about some of them? What
Yeah.
they come up with?
So one of the affirmatives was to um, essentially disarm our nuclear weapons. And the mechanism by which we would disarm or basically like get rid of our nuclear weapons would be to sign and ratify the Treaty for Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Um,
Okay.
so we kind of mentioned that maybe earlier, but basically the TPNW is a UN treaty. It was signed by over 100 countries, I think, but none of the nuclear armed countries
Okay.
have signed or ratified that treaty. And so this affirmative plan would basically be, I think like your most extreme version of an affirmative.
Okay.
It would be like, reduce the role and or number of nuclear weapons by just getting rid of all of them and signing on to an international treaty that kind of makes that international law.
Interesting. So that would be the TPNW case. That's what everyone's pretty much going to call it, huh?
Yeah, the TPNW case.
All right. Now, just spitballing. How like so if you're going to a tournament and you have 6 rounds, how likely is it going to be and you're going to have 3 affirmative, like you're going to see 3 affirmatives, right?
Mhm.
How likely do you think it's going to be that that this will be one of those 3?
I think either, if not this direct one, some version of disarmament.
Okay.
I think it's pretty likely. I mean, number on it, I would say like at least 30%
Okay.
of a chance that you would hit some version of disarmament. I think for a lot of teams, I think they're going to find it to be an attractive option. It takes like what I would call like an extreme or polemical stance on the resolution. And so the cards in support of it are going to be similarly like polemical. in the sense that they're going to be, written with like really strong language. They're going to be articles that
Oh,
are going to, already assume that there is an audience that disagrees with them,
okay.
and do a lot of work to fight back against some of those points of disagreement.
Okay. So like the whole if this is the most extreme form of disarmament, is there another version that's less extreme or just like not extreme at all?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the other affirmatives that was chosen by this topic was to, and I'll give you two examples and talk about kind of the differences. Uh,
Okay.
One was to eliminate ICBMs or intercontinental ballistic missiles.
Okay.
Um, and then the second was to remove strategic nuclear weapons from Europe.
Okay.
So those are two examples of affirmatives that are, you know, picking and choosing different types of nuclear weapons, or even the second case, a place where we have nuclear weapons, and saying to get rid of those.
Mm.
And I think those are going to be the most common kinds of affirmatives. It's just kind of trying to nail down all
Yeah.
the different types that could be out there.
And I'm assuming that there's probably some sort of strategic value in choosing one over the other. If there's, I don't know, like having a generic disarm disadvantage seems like like a good idea. It would seem kind of dumb not to have that, but at the same time, the fact that it is so predictable, it seems like you'd be able to I don't know, kind of tool your affirmative to work around some of them.
Yeah, so in the case of ICBMs in particular, I think one strategic component of the affirmative is that if you kind of like separated the literature into people who support nuclear deterrence and people who do not support nuclear deterrence conceptually,
Hmm.
there are people on the side of nuclear deterrence who still believe we should get rid of our ICBM
Got
infrastructure.
it. Yeah.
So that builds in a literature base that not only answers, your basic disadvantages, but also in a sense turns them, because there's going to be folks who are from the perspective that nuclear deterrence is good, but that we could enhance nuclear deterrence by getting rid of our intercontinental ballistic missiles.
Yeah, that's interesting. And that gets beyond just the level of like conversation, just like you and me talking about it, right? Like people, and that's what I love about season long topics is
Mhm.
that both sides make intuitive sense on a conversational level with
Yeah.
amateurs and stuff like that. But when you're like, all right, now let's take a look at what's been published, you're like, oh man, if we rephrase our affirmative this way, then we kind of get these authors on our side, and it becomes this really complicated like numbers game.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's the benefit and the drawback to
Mm,
season long evidence based debate. The benefit is definitely that you're getting a lot of really complicated, not only reading but also strategy
yeah,
associated with competition. I think the drawback is just like you said, to be competitive, you have to go beyond the sort of like conversational level of debate. And
mm,
for a lot of people, when they're just getting into debate, especially at the college level, you're mostly looking at folks that like are like, I like to argue, or like I
yeah,
dominate my arguments on Twitter.
yeah,
And so like the idea that like, okay, that is not good enough for this,
yeah,
it can be like a challenge. And I think it's why, if you kind of study, novice debate to second year JV, and that's the hardest transition. If you
yeah,
can get somebody to go from novice to open and stick, for the most part, they're going to stick for 4 years.
right.
But most leagues lose the majority of their competitors in the transition from novice to open.
Oh wow. All right. So we had disarm. Now, was that just one of the affirmatives from the co-op, or did they have multiple disarm AFs?
I think they had multiple, or I think they just had one disarm
Just
affirmative.
okay.
Um,
What were some of the others?
okay, so we had the disarm. We didn't talk at length about the removing nuclear weapons from Europe affirmative.
Oh, okay. Right. All right.
So that one basically is essentially arguing that we need to make a concession to Putin, leader of
Wow.
Russia, by getting rid of our nuclear weapons from Europe, and then in hopes that that kind of gesture would bring Putin to the table with NATO and maybe negotiate a peace in Ukraine. So a
Hmm.
lot of that affirmative was kind of about the way we could use a concession on our nuclear posture to negotiate an agreement with Vladimir Putin on the Ukraine conflict.
Oh, man. Yeah. So that would, that affirmative might change a lot over the season. I mean, like where the war is right now, we're hearing stuff that I don't know. I would think most of the headlines are pointing towards a little turning point in the Ukrainian counteroffensive,
Mm-hmm.
and so that one is like way more about like timing and like current event and like the updating that you'd have to do on that one. You're really taking on kind of a burden.
Yeah, like I said, whenever you pick an affirmative, what debates do you want to have? Maybe you're an extemper who's like,
Yeah.
one of my like biggest advantages over, the kids who did policy debate is that I read The Economist and the New York Times and Politico every day.
Hmm.
And so, I'm more up to date on the specifics of things like the Ukraine war that make their way to current events. Maybe I'm not as good at, like reading, scholarly articles on
Hmm.
like the theory of nuclear deterrence and realism in international relations, but I can get you on having really updated information. So, potentially that could be an attractive thing for someone.
Right.
Um, and I mean, like I said earlier in one of the other videos, one of the first ways to improve a debate is think about it this way: you got 3 half rounds. If you win all three, you only got to win one neg round to start breaking, right? And so if you want to break and you're not right now, maybe doing an affirmative that requires a lot of updates is helpful because you only have to worry about updating one affirmative versus your opponent who has to worry about, updating for multiple affirmatives.
All right.
And if the debate becomes a referendum on who has done the newest research on the content of the affirmative, ostensibly, as the affirmative, you should be winning that referendum, that debate. Doesn't always work out, but like as a point of strategy, I would hope that most affirmatives in rounds that were about who has the most updated argument with regard to the app's content, the app should be ahead in that debate.
All right. So there's the disarm. There's the Russia Europe AF. What were some of the others Co-op produced?
So the fourth one, I think this is the last one that I saw that they produced, also dealt with ICBMs,
Okay.
but instead of dealing with it from the perspective of um, getting rid of ICBMs, it was about modernizing ICBMs. So basically, like reducing ICBMs to a smaller number so that it's easier to update our ICBMs and make
Okay.
them better.
Oh, huh.
Right. So
That
that's
seems
one
kind
of
of like,
those.
yeah, like halfway. You're
Yeah.
trying to you're trying to have it both ways on that one.
So yeah, maybe that's one of those debates where you want to talk about topicality every round, because
Oh,
I
right.
think most negatives and most judges, it doesn't pass the smell test, right? Like
Hmm.
for the most part, judges. I mean, I think judges are going to give you wiggle room, but for the most part, I think judges want to hear the AF argue that nuclear weapons are bad, and the negative argue that they're good. Um,
Right.
so the AF arguing modernization, might be kind of a red flag. Um,
Okay. Okay.
Another affirmative that I saw that wasn't finished but was started was kind of about the security guarantees that we offer to NATO. So it was, in regards to our nuclear guarantees to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and how much we agree to supplement their own military efforts through our use of nuclear weapons in their backyard.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think you also need to be on the lookout for. This is not necessarily camp stuff, but just kind of like spitballing.
Right.
I think that you need to be on the lookout for affirmatives that deal with declaratory policy. So that's basically what we say publicly we will do with our nuclear weapons.
Mm.
So basically, right now, the United States has a policy that we would, in most circumstances, not use nuclear weapons first against any country. But there are definitely authors who want us to go further and make a pledge called a no first use pledge,
No
which would
first.
basically say that for every country and in every circumstance, we pledge that we would not use nuclear weapons first. They're only to be used in retaliation to a nuclear weapon attack.
Okay. Um, like I also saw that there was something called a novice packet. So if you got somebody like, what is that? Like, is that related to the co-op at all, or where's
So
that
if you
from?
saw the novice packet info, that is probably the ADA novice packet, I'm imagining.
Oh, okay.
And so that is for policy. But if you're
Oh,
doing LD, you definitely need to be on the lookout for that packet because
for this year. Yeah, yeah.
for this
This one.
season, they're virtually the same topic. So the ADA novice packet, which I love packet debate for
Oh, yeah.
novices. I think it's so helpful to like kind of take debate, as we mentioned, is how complex and how it can sprawl, and
Yeah,
like let them learn the basics under some some normal
totally.
middle of the road stuff. But so the affirmative that the ADA, the American Debate Association, put out for their novice debates
Okay.
is no first use. The app we were
No
just
first.
talking.
Oh, okay. Oh, just that was a nice little segue then.
Yeah, it's
Awesome.
a great segue.
All
Um,
right.
and so yeah, they do a great job because they put out like the affirmative, they put out the negative to that affirmative. They put out some disadvantages. They put out a counter plan, and they put out a critique.
Oh, wow.
And whenever you're debating in the division that uses the novice packet, you can only use the novice packet.
Oh,
So yeah, in LD, it's more just like, okay, here's some materials to start with. You can do whatever you want with them. In policy, if there's a division called novice using the ADA packet, that's it. You use the packet. I think you can retag it. You can re-underline
yeah.
it. You can do analytics, but in terms of the uh, carded evidence-based arguments, it's
Right.
just a packet.
Okay. What would you think about like doing a novice packet rule at a tournament? What do you like? Do you think?
I mean, I love it. So in high
Yeah.
school, I like coach a high school in Georgia, and Georgia uses packets. And a cool thing they do is, so their packet grows with the
I was
season.
wondering about that. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
So the college one, it looks like they give you a pretty good buffet of choices. In Georgia, I mean, also these are like children, so it's like they're
Yeah.
little tiny kids, right? They get an affirmative, a negative, and a disad to
Oh,
start, and that's it, right? Very limiting. But then each month, they add something to the plate. So they
that
may
sounds
add
awesome.
a text set, they may add a counterplan, they add a critique, they might add another affirmative. And
Wow.
so by the end of the year, the kind of menu for novice packet debate looks more representative of what you really might see in a division, but they kind of paste it. And a great thing they also do is they give supplemental teaching information, like because most high schools it's class,
Hmm.
so they give like the lesson plan to like teach what they've added on to the packet, which I think is super cool.
Very awesome. Like that sounds like a man. I'd love to see that in so many other associations adopting something like that. That'd be really cool. I wonder if even like limited prep, if you'd or like public forum, you know what I mean? Public forum changes every couple of months though, so you'd have to I don't know if that would work the same way, but that's such a great opportunity. One last question. I here's the thing. We're recording this before like one of the first main tournaments of NFALD season, like Western Kentucky, right? Like you're okay. We're recording it before, but we're posting it after. So let's have a little fun. Is there any unorthodox affirmatives that you think you're likely to see or just hear are be popping out at that tournament?
Yeah, so I think like the critique affirmatives, I think will
Okay.
be pretty popular. I think that there will be affirmatives that relate to settler colonialism. I think
Settler
will be
colonialism.
pretty popular. There's a lot of intersections between the history of nuclear weapons and indigenous people in the United States. If you watch the movie Oppenheimer,
Right.
there's a question where Oppenheimer, the quote unquote father of nuclear weapons, was kind of asked, like, what do you want to do with Los Alamos now? Because his stance was kind of like, let's stop doing nuclear weapons now.
Yeah.
And he was like, we should give it back to the Native Americans. And
Now, is that accurate? Like, do you know if he really said that?
I don't know if he actually said that.
Because like I watched that movie and like I'm like, all right, I want to know if he really said that. I mean, that's a pretty bold statement.
Yeah.
Oppenheimer said that, so I don't know much about him, and I haven't looked it up or anything like that.
Yeah,
But
no, I love the movie, but I didn't do more research after that. But that line stuck with me because I was like, yeah, there's this history of nuclear weapons and coloniality that I think a lot of K debaters are gonna want to explore this season, and I think that's awesome because I mean, I basically that's what I think is great about debate. If you're just taking a class on nuclear weapons, depending on your professor, you're going to get a menu of that history, that scholarship. Maybe if you have like a critical professor who dealt in the humanities, they might bring that up, but like they wouldn't be as informed about the military strategy part, right?
Right.
What I love about debate is that I think it's a great supplement to the education of students because you're getting the full breadth of the academy's interest in every topic. And so I think students are really going to explore the concept of coloniality, and I think they're going to do it on the AF. And maybe that gets incorporated into like a disarm nuclear weapons.
Right.
Maybe there's almost sort of like a filibuster approach to it, where they say before we can talk about the strategy of nuclear weapons, we need to reconcile the history of colonialism that built and developed nuclear weapons. So yeah, that would be my prediction, is that there's going to be a popular and probably pretty successful affirmative related to coloniality and nuclear weapons.
All right. Well, we will get to see. Maybe I'll check it out and post in the comments how good your prediction was. Thank you, Chad. We will do the same thing for the negatives on our next one. So thanks for coming, and I look forward to seeing you again.
Sweet. Right. It was great to talk to you.
All right.